Do you remember Beetleborgs? Spooky mansion, ghost that looks like Jay Leno, and kids that turn into comic book heroes? Well, I'm bringing them back. What's going on? I'm Dylan from Saturday Morning Props, where I teach everything 3D printing for getting newcomers into the hobby all the way to full Iron Man suits. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I made the 3 Big Bad Beetleborg helmets. First, let's talk about the files. I'm going to try to keep this rant short. Do not buy the files from random Instagram people. There's been a set of Beetleborg files that have been passed around everywhere in the Power Ranger community, and random Instagram accounts try to sell them to people when they aren't the designer. I took those files and reworked them, cut the eyes out, have them split better for printing, and I'm going to put those on Maker World for free. That way people can stop getting scammed. And this is the blue file from that. This is a file by Vec3D over on Wireframed. This is an awesome file, and he put some serious work into it. I wish I could recommend Levy3D's file, but this one is also a scam. The file that you see on his Instagram is nothing like the file that you get. If you look at his original post, he has details here that are completely not on the model at all. Same thing with this. Before, the model was actually connected with the ears, had better magnet tabs like this, and had those details. Now there is no connection point besides this tiny little tab for these ears, and the details are completely gone. On top of that, the peg on the top here is too big for the hole of the horn, so I had to cut this completely off. There's just a bunch of issues. Don't do this, just grab the free one off of Maker World. Now let's talk about printing. I printed both of these on my old Creality CR10 about a year ago. Now I would recommend a printer like the Ender 3 V3 Plus. It's a 300 by 300 build plate, super fast and super high quality. That would be a great printer for these helmets because they have such big horns and things like that. This I got resin printed by PCBWay. If somehow you don't know who PCBWay is, they do custom PCBs like the name entails, but also they do resin printing, electroplating, and a bunch of other services. With helmets like the Beetleborgs where they have this, cybernetic, deep lines and really cool mech looking style to them, resin printing was an awesome idea. Their services are super affordable and the quality comes out amazing. I'm about to teach you how to sand and paint these. This one gets to skip all the way to wet sanding because of how high quality it comes off as a resin print. Go check out their services. So let's talk about sanding and painting. As always, I start with 80 grit sandpaper. For detailed helmets like the Beetleborgs, I would say don't use a power sander. I take 80 grit sandpaper and I wrap it around a sponge and I hand sand all of the helmets. Then after that, I use smaller strips of sandpaper to get into the hard to reach spaces. And because Beetleborgs have all of these deep grooves, I actually use files to go through and scrape the detail lines to make sure those also get sanded. I'll have that linked in my Amazon link tree. Before sanding, I would actually attach the horns. I did that with the blue and it came out great to hide the seam. With the green Beetleborg and things like that, I wish I had done it early on so I could have seen the fitment issues that I was gonna have. Like I mentioned, the peg doesn't fit for the horn on the red Beetleborg by Levy, so I had to cut it completely off and then use hot glue at the end to attach this. After the 80 grit was done, I used spot putty and acetone to fill in some of those layer lines. You can use whatever spot putty you like, Bondo spot putty, U-Pull, whatever you have. I thin it with acetone 1:1 so that way I can brush it onto the model. This allows it to be a lot thinner and not to gum up all the details. Once that's cured, it's time for 120 grit. I do this exactly the same as 80 grit. I use a sponge and I use little strips and I use files again to make sure that if there was any putty that got into those detail lines that I can pull it back out. Now it's time for filler primer. Use whatever is available to you. Rust-Oleum, Duplicolor, U-Pull, whatever filler primer you have, they all do a really good job. Grab what's cheap and have fun. After I sprayed the helmets with filler primer, it's time for wet sanding. Now this is where you can start with the red helmet. I then wet sanded everything with 220. Try to get a sandpaper that's actually made for wet sanding. I have a little bucket in my garage that I fill up with water and I wet sand out there. After I finish the 220, I go straight into 320. And after 320, I go into 400. Now is when we want to add these buckles to the helmet. When I first saw reference images, they didn't have the buckles, so I didn't do that on my blue Beetleborg, unfortunately. But when I rewatched the show, I saw that they did have buckles. So my green and my red both have clasps. I have a tutorial on my channel on exactly how to do that, and all those supplies are also linked in my link tree. I wish I had done it for the blue one as well. With the buckles on, it's time for its first layer of primer. I used a matte black Rust-Oleum primer to coat all of the helmets. This is the first layer of color for the eyes. Then using 3M automotive masking tape, I mask the eye sections. I get ready to paint aluminum by Rust-Oleum over all of the models. The aluminum color is going to be our base for the green, blue, and red. I then masked the silver as well. For the blue Beetleborg, I used a Rust-Oleum metallic blue that I think is absolutely gorgeous. The green Beetleborg, I did a Duplicolor color match but it came out a little dark. I would have liked this to be a little bit brighter. Metal Cast makes a green as well, but I thought that that was too highlightery green, so I haven't really found the perfect color for this yet, but I do like the way that this finish came out. And the red came out gorgeous. I originally tried Metal Cast red, but that was too orange. This was actually a fire red by Duplicolor Color Match. Now I think U-Pull has taken over that paint line, but it's called Fire Red. It's an automotive color match, and it's super, super nice. I love the way that this helmet came out. Then it was time to hand paint the details. I used Vallejo acrylic paints to paint all the little blue and yellow and red details. For the blue and red, it paints really easily. But for things like yellow, I actually paint gray first because that allows the yellow to cover a lot better. Otherwise, you'd have to do a million coats of yellow. I thin the acrylic paints with a little bit of water, and I do thin coats to make sure that you don't get any brush strokes. For the red, I actually hand painted the ears and all these details as well. Vallejo Model Air Silver is a really awesome paint and covers really well. With all the colors finally painted, I then clear coated. I did these two helmets with a 2K clear coat, but originally I had done this helmet in a 1K clear coat by Duplicolor. That is readily available and super easy to use, so I would highly recommend using the Duplicolor 1K. But because I've upgraded my setup a little bit, I used 2K and I had to redo the blues as well so that would match the finish of all the others. As I mentioned earlier, I said you should attach the horns and everything early on in the project. It's tempting to keep them off so that way it's easier to sand and you don't have to mask a lot of things. But trying to do fitment at the end of the project can leave you with issues. Also, glue works better on a non-painted surface. Like I mentioned with Levy's files, there's not a good contact point for the ears. So I used hot glue for that connection and poured it in there to create a stronger bond. Hot glue is thicker and it fills in the gaps and the voids that are missing. Now let's talk about the eyes. To make the eyes pop a little bit, I use Gundam Panel Liner. It's a Tamiya ink that you drip into the line and it actually goes through the whole crack for you. Let it sit for like a minute and then clean up the little drip with a Q-tip. Super easy and adds a lot of detail. I just used leftover plastic from face shields to create lenses. And then I used Spastix transparent colors to spray them with an airbrush. The awesome part is it looks super opaque, but you can actually still see through them. I think it makes the eyes super vibrant while it's still sitting on the shelf, but it's so awesome that you can still look through them. And all I did was use hot glue to hot glue those in on the inside. And then I used elastic strapping as a hinge system for the helmets here. So I hot glued elastic to both sides of the front and back of the helmet. And if you're wondering, yes, these are wearable. These helmets are a childhood dream come true. I've always loved Beetleborgs and I could never imagine actually owning these helmets and having these in my house. 3D printing is still such a crazy thing to me and I'm so grateful for it. If you're liking the content, like, comment, subscribe. Drop a comment down below if you remember Beetleborgs or not. It all really helps the channel grow. Watch another video after this, like how to size 3D printed helmets. Love you guys. Peace.